आ गया हूँ मैं। I am here. So I might see you. Everybody. So the main participant will be a village people.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the online launch of the International Energy Agency Sustainable Recovery Plan for India. We have a very distinguished list of guests and participants from the Government of India, from the International Energy Agency, and also from representatives from both the academia and the private sector of India. As usual, I would like to ask the participants who are not speaking to mute their microphones. And I would like to invite Mr. Amitabh Kant, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Institution for Transforming India, to make his welcoming remarks. Mr. Kant, the floor is yours.
I'm truly delighted to welcome the key speakers and panelists. I would particularly like to welcome the Honorable Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Railways and Minister of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. I would also like to welcome Mr. Subramaniam, the Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. I take this opportunity of congratulating my friend Dr. Fateh Birol, the Executive Director of IEA, and the IEA team on the India launch of the Special Report on Sustainable Recovery. Niti Aayog has had a very close working relationship with IEA in the energy sector, including in the areas of systems integration of renewables, data management, energy policy reviews, and energy statistics, amongst others. The COVID-19 pandemic has created an enormous impact on the global economy, which is set to shrink by over 6% in 2020. This is the biggest crisis of our lifetime. Some 300 million jobs have been lost during the second quarter of the year. This disruption has sent shockwaves through the energy markets too, with global energy investment expected to shrink by an unparalleled over 20% in 2020. It is therefore imperative that the recovery efforts are geared towards green recovery modules. After the 2008-9 financial crisis, green measures accounted for around 16% of total stimulus measures. To recover from COVID-19 inflicted impact, we have to be even more ambitious and decisive towards clean investments. Given that need, the IEA Sustainable Recovery Plan has an extremely useful role in guiding the governments, businesses, technologists, and all other key decision makers across the globe. In response to COVID-19 crisis, the government of India has taken many measures on financial system stability, social measures and assistance for workers and the vulnerable households, and liquidity provisions for SMEs, amongst others. Under the Atmanirbhar Bharat program led by the Honorable Prime Minister, several announcements have been made with regard to energy sector, including liquidity management to promoting manufacturing capacity. Specifically in the energy sector, support has been provided for energy access, including the government guaranteed free LPG refills to poor households from April to June 2020, and public investment support for ongoing projects and government loans, provisions for liquidity injections and state guaranteed loans to electricity distribution companies in India, thus creating a safety net for companies and consumers. As highlighted by IEA's Sustainable Recovery Report, the energy industry is a major employer that directly employed around 40 million people around the world in 2019, with 50% workforce in electricity generation and bioenergy production and distribution. India's renewable energy workforce has grown fivefold in the past 5 years. In 2019, nearly 100,000 workers are employed in the solar and wind industry, compared to a mere 19,000 workers in 2014. As estimated by IEA, energy efficiency and vehicle manufacturing are the highest share of jobs at risk post-COVID-19. There is therefore a need for targeted interventions and proactive decision-making to sustain and accelerate these major drivers of green economy. With respect to vehicle electrification, India's goals for a high personal vehicle electrification by 2030 will drive employment, and considering efficient appliances, India's cooling demand is set to grow rapidly in the next decade, as well as use of other household appliances. Incentives at point of purchase for efficient models could keep demand for appliances up during the economic crisis. This could be a competitive advantage as Indian appliance manufacturers could be poised to be leaders in low HFC air conditioning units. The foundation of modern energy systems, enhancing grid strength and widening connectivity, is key to increasing integration of renewables and is set to be a major investment need in the coming years in India. As a part of green growth, India has become the third largest solar capacity country in the world and has set a very high ambitious target of 450 gigawatt of renewable capacity by 2030, comprising 300 gigawatt of solar capacity. Globally, solar PV is expected to expand from the current annual production capacity of 100 gigawatt to 3,000 gigawatt by 2030. We are determined to make the most of it in India and build up our energy security through renewable energy. We are pushing for green skill development, targeted interventions and access to green finance and cutting-edge innovation in clean technologies. In Niti Aayog, we've been championing sustainable initiative since its inception through the SDG Index, Electric Mobility Mission, ACC Battery Scheme, and our leadership in methanol economy initiatives stand testament to Niti Aayog's commitment to the sustainable causes. India and the world should be focusing on sustainable recovery as outlined by IEA, not only because it is the right thing to do for the environment, but because it's the right thing to drive the economy. With these few words, let me again take this opportunity of welcoming the Honorable Minister and all the distinguished guests Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Can you kindly unmute? Can you kindly?
Dr. Bilal, we can't hear you. Dr. Bilal, we can't hear you.
And Secretary Sahai and Mr. Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor. So IEA-India relationship is getting deeper and deeper, closer and closer. We are so delighted for that. We are going to hopefully very, very soon, we are going to make a historical announcement to announce India becoming the IEA's first ever strategic partner, and this partnership will pave the way for even closer relationship. So, and this journey, in fact, started with Minister Goyal when I met him several years ago, and with his great support, it has been getting stronger and stronger, and we were honored to have Minister Singh participating in our ministerial meeting, Clean Energy Transition Summit, which brought 40 ministers around the world. Mr. Kant said just perfectly, this is a unique health crisis and huge implications on the economy and on energy. With economy, all of us talk around the world when you read the newspapers about how much the economy went down, the recession 5%, 6% here. But one area I think we will be reading more and more in the newspapers in the next months to come, which is the unemployment issue. We think that this year over 300 million jobs are at risk, and a significant amount of them are also in the energy sector. Unemployment is a big issue. Now, we thought, as IEA, being we think a responsible organization, while governments around the world are going through this difficult time, how can we help them? What kind of advice we can give it to them so that they, on one hand, give a boost to economic growth, address the unemployment issue, but also prepare a better, cleaner energy future. So we work with the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and as Mr. Khan said, made a sustainable recovery plan for the next 3 years, 2021, 2022, 2023. Look at what kind of energy policies should be included in the government's recovery plans so that we can have these 3 objectives reached: giving an additional boost to economic growth, reducing the unemployment, and helping the cleaner, greener energy future to be created. So we look at every country, but of course, as usual, very closely on India. We think there are huge opportunities in India, including the efficiency improvement. In my view, efficiency is a job-creating machine. It creates jobs, and jobs from renovation to others. And also the supporting India's very impressive electrification solar growth. And also, as Mr. Kant mentioned, innovation technologies such as batteries, super efficient cooling, and hydrogen. My colleague, Mrs. Lara Cosi, our Chief Energy Modeler, will talk about our report in detail, but I can tell you that the first steps we see made in India gives us the signal that India if implemented, the current economic packages can make India once again a very competitive frontrunner in the next clean tech boom, if not the leading next clean technology boom. And this is, I think, very much in line with what Mr. Kant said. Now, I want to, before finishing my words, again, something with point on Mr. Goyal. When Mr. Goyal was Minister of Power and Coal, of course, when I heard that he was going to be Minister of Railways, which is, of course, one of the biggest portfolios in the world, I was a bit sad that he was leaving the energy portfolio. But he told me that he is going to use his ambition to make this world's the largest network of railways 100% green by 2030. I said, this is I said to myself, I didn't speak loud. I thought myself, it would be, it's a very good ambition, but very difficult to reach, given the scale of the challenge of India and also the railway systems generally in the world. But when I look at the progress, we follow closely what's happening in the railway sector in India. I am more and more convinced that India is making a huge step in terms of reaching this goal, having a green railway by 2030, modernization of the railway sector from the electricity provided to the toilets, from toilets to the speed, from speed to decreasing accidents in the railway system. So if India puts in his mind, with the very strong leadership there, India can deliver. As such, I am sure that India, with the economic packages India has now, we may well see India to be a front runner in the next clean technology boom. And IEA will be very happy to support India in this phase as well as we have been doing before. So I am honored to give this opening remarks. I am turning back to Mr. Lazo, our chief economist. Mr. Lazo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. And now I would like to invite Ms. Laura Kozzi, the Chief Energy Modeler of the International Energy Agency, who led the work of the Sustainable Recovery Plan, to present the main findings. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Minister, colleagues from Niti Young, all dignitaries. It's my great pleasure to actually share with you the findings of this study that was done, as Dr. Birol mentioned, together with the International Monetary Fund. I would like to start with something that Dr. Kant actually mentioned at the beginning. Let's try to assess the situation we are in today. If you look at the energy sector and you take a bit of a historical perspective, we are really going through a tremendous crisis, something that we haven't seen for the past 70 years. Dr. Kant mentioned the decrease in energy demand. Clearly, this has led a big slump in investment, and importantly, we have estimated 6 million jobs at risk in the energy sector, across the entire energy sector, from solar to grids, to oil and gas, to efficiency. Now, when this happened back in March, April, our executive director immediately said, let's analyze what's the situation in terms of impact, but also let's come out immediately with what could be a package to propose to our countries around the globe and to help lift out of this triple crisis we are actually living. Together with this terrible health crisis, there are 3 emergencies that we want to try to solve. The first is really boosting the economies. We're seeing tremendous contractions everywhere. So the first preoccupations around the globe is now making investments to make sure that we can boost economic growth everywhere. Second, making sure that we retain jobs and create new jobs. Dr. Kant mentioned the 300 million jobs. Here we really want to focus also on the job losses that are actually happening in the energy sector as well. And third and final, during this crisis, the energy sector has been rather silent, but I would like to stress the following, especially electricity has been key to go through this crisis in the smoother way as possible. Even this very meeting that is happening through IT tools is happening also because we are all enjoying secure electricity supplies. And this we think is going to be key to maintain in the future. So the analysis with the IMF, what did we find? We found the following. If we are able to mobilize $1 trillion for the next 3 years globally, 2021, 2022, 2023, this money would come partly from governments, most of it from the private sector, with the help of banks all over, development banks, private banks, all the financial community together. If we were able to target these three key areas, efficiency, as Dr. Birol mentioned, electricity, very key, and the other there is innovation, but for India in particular, rail is also belonging there, and transport in general, we would have tremendous advantages in all the key topics we mentioned: jobs, growth, and resilience of the energy sector. Is 1 trillion a lot of money? I just want to go back to 2009, 2010. Of course, it is a lot of money, but back 10 years ago, we spent already 500 billion in sustainable recoveries. Today, we are in a very different situation compared to 10 years ago. Cost of solar has gone down tremendously. We have a huge range of technologies that is much cheaper. We are in a situation where we can actually invest more and get a much larger productivity of those more sustainable and cleaner investment. So what do we find in terms of GDP? International Monetary Fund ran their macro models for us, and what we found actually is that we wouldn't only be able to get out of the crisis, but also jump up the economic growth, the baseline economic growth in emerging economies, and in particular in Asia, by 1.5 percentage points every year. This is very significant in the situation we are in today. It's very large. If you look at jobs, I mentioned the 6 million jobs at risk in the energy sector alone. This plan would be able to create 9 million jobs. If you look at India in particular, here the findings that we have, and are very, very significant ones. First of all, look at the green. As Dr. Birol mentions, energy efficiency, job machines. We have and see potential new jobs happening in the construction side, in general, in green buildings, but efficient products as well. India has led the world on LEDs, and we feel it's ready to make the next jumps on air conditioning, on agricultural pumps, moving from diesel to solar pumps and beyond. So the energy efficiency sector clearly leading the way in terms of, on one hand, investment, and on the second hand, also in terms of jobs. Second area is electricity. There you see two key areas. I will focus 1 second on solar. The government of India has put a very ambitious target that we strongly support. We have seen that despite the crisis, the solar industry is going relatively well. But to reach these important targets that the government of India has put forward, a boost would really be needed. I would like to acknowledge here the work that CEW has done in this topic, and the feedback very important that they gave us for this report, highlighting as well the importance of maintaining and creating new solar jobs. And finally, the third area there, the red that you see there, is really comprising two different things. First is networks beyond electricity, and here I go back to, and will not repeat what Dr. Birol mentions, that rails is clearly one big area. But the other one that we had the pleasure to discuss a few months ago with the Secretary of Power a few months back is the new technologies. We are looking at batteries, for example, critical for electricity, but also beyond that, cleaner transport. And increasingly, we are looking at hydrogen. So what would be the implications then on two areas here? I come back to electricity. Electricity, we often very talk about new capacity additions. And this is everywhere in the world. The focus has been, we have new capacity. But we feel, and the numbers have shown us, that grids and electricity networks require heightened attention. Here what you see is what has happened globally in terms of investments. You see they've been rather flat, and worryingly, we are seeing investment in grids going down. 2019 and 2020, even pre-crisis globally, we saw investment in grids going down. We think that this has to be reversed and very quickly reversed to bring more money to grids. What does it mean? It doesn't only mean creating new lanes. Of course, that's essential, but it's also smartening the grids, making sure that we have digital grids able to connect different parts of the systems, connecting storage, connecting electric vehicles, collecting distributed resources. More and more smarter grids, mini grids were needed, and really critical to strengthen them to make sure that they are ready for potential issues that may arise in the future. One important point of grids, and those have very, very large job multipliers. They would bring back workers very quickly across different continents, including in India. Finally, I'd like to touch upon something that the government of India has already put forward in the self-reliant India recovery package, and is really around the poorest part of the society, and in particular clean cooking. This is one of the areas that we are identifying as key. LPG prices are really going down all over the world, and we see this as an opportunity to push forward and really reach the poorest part of the societies that are still using very primitive forms of cooking. India has made a tremendous progress over the past years. We are never stopping to praising India for what has achieved, and we encourage India to do and go further and make use of this opportunity of cheaper LPG to distribute it to the poorer families, creating new jobs in these informal sectors and formal sectors, and supporting also women and rural parts of the society. Certainly, really a big kudos and encouragement to continue to do this forward. My last slide takes a step backwards and looks at the other implications on greenhouse gas emissions, in particular on CO2. We take a bit of an historic view and see what has happened during the last financial crisis. 2009, emissions went down. Not a surprise, the economy contracted. What happened afterwards? Stimulus packages around the world. Of course, the technology in energy was very different back then. And what happened? We started to install a very carbon-reliant capital stock. It was normal back then, and this is the resulting is increasing in emissions, not only on CO2, but pollutions in our cities all over the planet. We saw a decline in 2020. Where do we go from here? We see really two possibilities. One, if we use economic stimulus as we did in 2009, emissions will rebound and go up again, including on local pollution, the smogs in our cities. But there is an opportunity here to grasp with efficiency, with solar, with grids, to make sure that CO2 and local pollutants remain at a much more sustainable level. I really look forward to hear comments from all our speakers later on, and thank you very much for this incredible opportunity and to all our partners. Thank you again. Back to you, Laszlo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite Mr. Krishnamurthy V. Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India and one of the leading experts on economic policy anywhere in the world, to deliver a special address and share his insights with us. Dr. Subramanian, we are honored to have you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Very good afternoon, Shri Piyush Goyal ji, Honorable Minister of Railways and Minister of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, Shri Amitabh Kant ji, CEO of Niti Aayog, Dr. Fatih Barol, Executive Director, IEA, Ms. Laura Cozy, Chief Energy Modeler, IEA, esteemed dignitaries and all participants. First, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to share my thoughts at this very important event. Let me start by congratulating both Niti Aayog and IEA for the launch of the IEA Sustainable Recovery Plan amidst this unprecedented crisis that the entire globe is witnessing. I'll have to say something about the role of in the recovery, but I think it is fit that I say something about the macroeconomy, especially in the Indian context, before I comment on the role of the green economy. In the context of the macroeconomy, I think it's been very well highlighted that this is indeed an unprecedented crisis. I just want to point out one particular factoid to many that have been mentioned. The World Economic Forum pointed out that if you look at the number of countries where GDP per capita is going to shrink this year, that number will be the highest in the last 150 years. The last time such a number, was registered was in 1870. So we're living through once in a 1.5 century kind of event. So clearly, really unprecedented times. Now, India's GDP in the first quarter declined by 23.9%, and many of you might have actually noticed that particular aspect. What is critical, and I have three main observations to make in that context. Firstly, India had a very intense lockdown, which itself was necessitated by the by how India is as a country, extremely large population, very high population density, and so given the network effects that affect the pace of spread of a pandemic, India needed that kind of lockdown. And the GDP decline in the first quarter is clearly because of that lockdown, because there were significant restrictions that were placed on economic activities. In fact, if one does, if one correlates the intensity of lockdown as measured by the Oxford University's index and compares it with the decline across small countries over the globe in the April to June quarter, it is very clear that the India lies on the line of fit. And one observation on that, which is quite important, is that which highlights India's humane policy, which has focused on preserving lives based on the principle that while GDP growth will recover, and the evidence clearly shows that it is recovering, human lives, once they are lost, cannot be retrieved. And that's illustrated by the number of deaths per capita being so low in India, 5 per 100,000, which is about 1/12 of many other countries, so which clearly illustrates India's humane strategy. The second observation that I want to make is that the Indian economy, based on many policy interventions that were implemented since July 2019, had started to really pick up momentum up until the month of February, when COVID struck in the month of March. And I say this based on data. If you look at the Google Mobility Index data, in the month of March, the mobility index was down 20% compared to the levels in January and February. And we all know that March, being the last month of the financial year, is a very critical month. If you looked at these, various indicators, the index of industrial production, the 8 core sectors, cement production, steel production, electricity generation, exports, all these railway freight. If you looked at all these indicators in the month of February this year, they were actually at their peak, and all of them were in positive territory for the first time since July 2019. In fact, the Purchasing Managers Index, which is indicative of future activity, was at its peak, especially in the services sector, which is the dominant sector in the Indian economy, and was reaching close to 60%. And that's when COVID struck. So, I can easily say that, if COVID had struck, let's say, a month later, the growth rate in the last quarter of last year would have been much higher than the 3.1%, and in fact would have been higher than Q3 of last year, which illustrates that the policy interventions that the government was taking was indeed having its impact. That's when COVID struck. Now, having mentioned that the Q1 decline is primarily because of the lockdown, it's also being seen in the unlock phase, which is really enabling recovery. If you look at, especially in the manufacturing sector, I'm going to just point out a few high-frequency indicators. My office tracks almost 60 indicators on a weekly basis. If you look at the power consumption, which is a very important indicator for manufacturing activity, it is almost the same levels as August of last year. That's in the month of August this year. If you look at e-way bills are 98% of the level last year. And some people may wonder why is it not reflected in the GST revenues. That is because there is a moratorium that's been provided. Companies have been allowed to file their GST returns with a lag, with some delay has been provided, grace period, and that's why the GST revenues have not correlated fully with what we've seen in the e-way bills. If you look at cement and steel production, look at the railway freight again, which was 106% in the month of August compared to last year's month of August. When you look at all these and the fact that the Purchasing Managers Index for manufacturing for the first time has gotten into the expansionary phase, is at 52 now in the month of August, clearly suggests that there is a recovery that is on. Of course, some of the concerns on the services sector do remain, because this is a crisis that stems from the pandemic and the need for social distancing, which clearly affects sectors like travel, tourism, and more generally discretionary consumption. Because we economists, you have this term called the precautionary motive to save, which most of the households and firms go into when faced with a crisis, especially a crisis of this nature. So the government has taken a lot of measures. The Atmanirbhar Bharat package was collectively 10% of GDP, and it is important to keep in mind the liquidity, credit, and the restructuring measures that were announced apart from the fiscal component, because eventually when you think about GDP comprised of consumption, investment, and government spending, and of course net exports, all these credit, liquidity affect consumption primarily in a time like this. So like other countries did, we also use the portfolio of measures, including liquidity, credit, and the fiscal. Now that said, I think it's important to focus on what will be the role that the green economy will play in the recovery going forward, not only in India but globally. I think if we look at the history of disruptions across the world, if you take the recent disruptions, like for instance the advent of the internet, or even go back, let's say the advent of the motor car, in all these instances, there were technologies that benefited and sectors that benefited from the disruption, and there were other sectors that lost out. If we look at the COVID period, this disruption will serve a lot of the technology sectors, especially green economy. And I think I'll pick up a couple of anecdotes. During the lockdown in India, there were lots of pictures that were shared of how the water in the Ganges, a river that we all, really venerate, had become so clean during the lockdown, which illustrated, in some sense, through the lockdown, of course, the impact of economic activity and the need, therefore, for climate change. So the green economy, I think, even though this is a big crisis, this has highlighted the role for economic development to happen in a sustained manner. And India is clearly at the forefront of this particular, of this effort. The Honorable Prime Minister has announced an aspirational target of increasing our renewable energy capacity to 450 gigawatts. And if you look at the renewable energy capacity, that has grown about 2.3 times over the last 5 years, and it stands close to 90 gigawatt as of 31st of August 2020. If you just focus on the solar installed capacity, that has grown 13.5 times in the last 6 years, from about 2.6 gigawatts to 35.7 gigawatts. And especially at the bottom of the pyramid, the Ujjwala Yojana, which is, has been a spectacular success by bringing in 80 million, LPG connections in rural areas. And if you think about typically, let's say, at the bottom of the pyramid, one LPG connection per household, this translates into a very large number, which would be more than many countries' populations put together. So these are the kind of initiatives that India has taken in the area of renewable energy. Even had an allocation of 22,000 crores for renewable energy. So India clearly remains committed to furthering sustainable development in general and sustainable recovery following the COVID crisis. And therefore, I expect India to be a particularly interested party in this sustainable recovery following the COVID crisis. I once again congratulate Niti Aayog and IEA for bringing out this sustainable recovery plan, and look forward to further actions on this very, very important front. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Subramanian, for your special address. Ladies and gentlemen, we are fortunate to have the Honorable Piyush Goyal, Minister for Railways, Commerce and Industry of the Government of India, with us to deliver our keynote address. I understand that we had some IT problems. Hopefully they are resolved, and we would be able to have the keynote address from Minister Goyal. Thank you.
Thank you. There was no IT problem here, but I think there's some problem in the transmission from the other side, because all my other VCs are going on smoothly, but be that as it may, I've been able to catch quite a large part of whatever was said. Thank you, Amitabh, for your opening remarks. Dr. Subramaniam, Dr. Fatih Birol, Ms. Laura Cozy, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We are indeed grateful to Niti Aayog and IEA. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. You are.
All right, because I'm getting a blank screen. I really am grateful to Niti Aayog and IEA for launching this special report on sustainable recovery, particularly at this very crucial juncture when the country is, and large parts of the world, are moving into the phase of recovery, even though we are not yet out of the woods in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic's effects. I think large parts of the world have realized that we will have to create a fine balance between lives and livelihoods. And I believe this is the right time to move forward in terms of preparing ourselves, as you have rightly pointed out in your report also, for a resilient future, both sustainable and resilient future. In fact, there's that old adage which says large problems bring forth even larger opportunities. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is one person who believes in converting every crisis into an opportunity. So much so that while we had to cancel a number of passenger trains during the lockdown and even after that, we used every single opportunity we got through the length and breadth of Indian Railways across the country to complete very long pending infrastructure projects that needed large amounts of maintenance blocks or blocking of traffic for long durations in such a way that we would never have got an opportunity in the normal course of things. And almost 200 such infrastructure projects in the railways we were able to complete using this lockdown when we did not have passenger trains running. In fact, Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant India, has emerged out of this COVID-19 pandemic, and the government of India is looking upon this as an opportunity to prepare ourselves for years of prosperity in the post-pandemic world. We believe COVID has presented all of us with a chance to reinvent, to reimagine, and redesign business processes, government functions, government procedures, government policies. And we believe if we miss the bus today in building a glorious and sustainable future for our future generations, we will regret it for years and years to come. We all recognize the dire need to reform our processes, bring in more transparency in our systems, reduce intrusive government inspections and government interference or involvement in businesses, and make more and more systems seamless, smooth, and move towards self-regulation and self-certification rather than government-oriented processes. In fact, the model of development that India chose under Prime Minister Modi's visionary leadership has focused a lot on the coexistence between environment and development. We believe that development is important. We have the imperative of creating jobs, expanding our economic activity, our industry, our manufacturing base, further taking forward our production of mineral resources, our energy needs. But in each one of these, look at more and more sustainable processes which can truly help us become a self-reliant India and take progress to the next level. In fact, a large number of lessons have been learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced the entire world to look at new trusted partners for international trade, for economic engagement, and has also highlighted the importance of robust, sustainable, and resilient supply chains for goods and services. In fact, I'm happy to share with the distinguished participants today that during the COVID-19 period, our services industry, and by services, I'm not looking at the aviation or restaurants and hotel or tourism sector. I'm looking at the IT business processes and international engagement on the services side. India continued to ensure seamless support and delivery of services to all its clients worldwide, right through the lockdown from March itself. So much so that not one single client internationally of an Indian company where we were required to either do BPO services or IT services or help people in R&D, not one service delivery was affected during the entire lockdown period. We are, for the last 6 months since March 22nd until now, when I look at the figures of services export, we are at about 92% plus in terms of services export right through the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. This has given a lot of confidence to stakeholders across the world about India being a trusted partner when it comes to global engagement, when it comes to their reliance of international companies and governments on India, be it for medical supplies, be it for our export products, be it for our services that we provide, and therefore keeping the economy running ensuring the infrastructure is fed all through this period was a role that the government was very focused on. The Indian Railways continued to work throughout this period to transport goods, including food grain, fertilizer, coal, iron ore, steel products, all the basic products that the country needs to keep the economy moving. And I'm happy to share with you that all through this period, we did not face any shortages of food grain at any nook and corner of the country. None of our farmers had to worry for adequate supplies of fertilizers. And most importantly, every power plant that needed coal got it in time, got it in adequate quantity, and we were able to ensure that the entire country gets power throughout the lockdown and thereafter, so that people are not inconvenienced at home for lack of electricity or lack of water, which is also intrinsically linked to electricity. My good friend Dr. Fatih Birol talked about efficiency, and he also talked about the railways plans to become a net zero railway and the world's largest rail network, which would become net zero. Dr. Birol and I have worked very closely together when we rolled out the massive LED lighting program in India, where India was successful in almost uniformly replacing throughout the country all our old incandescent lighting systems with highly energy efficient LED lighting systems, which has saved the country close to $5 to $6 billion in terms of annual energy consumption, and has also helped reduce carbon emissions in a very large measure. Of course, it has given a lot of benefit to our power consumers, whose electricity bills also have fallen significantly in this period, while helped India contribute to the global effort to bring down carbon emissions and prepare the world for a less carbon future, for a future which is more efficient in terms of sustainability. In the Indian Railways, by December 2023, we would be 100% electricity-driven railway. And we are well on track on that. We are more than 65% already running on electric transmission. And in the next 3 years and 4 months, we are extremely committed and confident to convert the rest of the system. Large number of projects are already at an advanced stage to electric traction and become a completely diesel-free rail transportation, mass transportation system. The first railway of this size and scale in the entire world. We have about 120,000 track kilometers running through a large country like India. We would be 100% driven by electricity. Simultaneously, we are expanding our solar and wind footprint so that we increasingly produce our own electricity through renewable sources. In the initial stage, we are looking at solar energy along the tracks so that it can be fed directly into the power system of the railways. And at the second stage, we'll be looking at solar energy being installed in the large tracts of lands that the railway owns in different parts of the country, fed into the grid for banking and onward usage by the railways. Of course, that has its own challenges, and which is why I've kept the time frame up to 2030. And Dr. Birol, you worked with me long enough to know that under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, we are committed to achieve and we shall achieve. There is no ifs and buts. There is no room for failure. We have to achieve it. We shall, we will achieve it. I've kept 2030 in the hope that we will see battery storage or other forms of storage become more viable, become more affordable, so that the railways can generate the electricity and store it and use it for the railways rather than going through the grid and having to bank it with the electricity distribution companies, which actually adds to their stress and to their costs. Therefore, a lot of the time that I'm cushioning is more for the storage to become affordable. Should the battery storage become more affordable, faster, the Indian Railways is committed to move towards a net zero railway even faster than 2030, subject to storage, pricing and affordability. You'll also be happy to know, and Dr. Krishnamurthy alluded to it with the August numbers, but Dr. Krishnamurthy, the September numbers until yesterday, the first 17 days of September are indeed very exciting. The Indian Railways has moved 14% more freight in the first 17 days, 14% more freight than we did in the first 17 days of September in 2019. So effectively, I don't think there can be a better measure of the rapid recovery that is happening in India than the two data points that you highlighted, the increasing use of electricity. I believe we've crossed last year's August-September levels in terms of electricity consumption. And now, as I pointed out, the growing traffic moving through railways. Of course, we are also moving that rail freight at twice the speed we were moving 1 year ago, largely because the passenger trains are not on the path, on the track, but also because of more efficient planning. And we plan to institutionalize it so that this becomes a part of the timetable. We move the freight trains in convoys much faster, thereby taking half the time they would otherwise take to their destination, bringing down logistics costs, benefiting our power sector also, and making electricity affordable for the people of India. I do believe that this partnership between the International Energy Agency and India has a very vital role to play in our future plans towards sustainability. We do believe, as Madam Laura mentioned rightly, that in the post-COVID world, the entire energy scenario is going to be re-looked at with a different prism. The lens is going to change. And this has presented a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to prepare for a much more sustainable future, look at what we can do to make energy transition to sustainable energy smoother, faster, more resilient, and more affordable. And India actually has shown the way in making renewable energy and energy efficient viable and affordable and cheaper. Be it the LED bulbs, where we were able to bring down our price by nearly 86% in a short span of 2 years, or the cost of solar electricity or wind electricity, which has come down to never before levels, in some cases to as low as 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour of solar or wind energy. I believe these are signs of scale and new technology revolutionizing the future of clean energy. And India would like to contribute to any other country in the world in their own renewable energy and sustainability programs. We would like to offer our unstinted support, our complete support to any countries of the world, be they of the developed world or the developing or least developed countries, India stands committed as the promoter of the International Solar Alliance with France to support global engagement, global partnerships, and provide a renewed thrust to bring down the emission levels, the emission intensity in the world, give a boost to renewable and clean energy, and bring about this radical change in a very quick, time-bound manner. We also welcome the initiatives on battery storage. We welcome initiatives on new technologies like hydrogen. We are very committed to our electric mobility plan. We are very keen that by 2030, the new cars, new vehicles that are sold in India should largely be powered by electricity. That electricity should come from renewable sources, and the battery storage in our automobiles would then act as a natural hedge to balance the grid, particularly for the peak hours, and bring down the emission levels, particularly in our cities, which are today facing huge amounts of vehicular emission. In fact, on a number of areas, whether it is transport, we have adopted BS6 standards, equivalent to the Euro 6 standards, far before most developed countries have transitioned to Euro 6. We have a focused energy efficiency program to improve our pumps, motors, air conditioners, heating systems. It's a holistic 360-degree comprehensive effort that Prime Minister Modi has envisaged for India's own contribution as a responsible global citizen as we transition towards a sustainable and resilient energy future for the world. As has often been said, we have not inherited this earth for ours to spoil. We have inherited this earth as trustees for the future generations, and we are duty bound to protect the environment and leave behind a better world for our children, for the next generation to live in. My best wishes to IEA and Niti Aayog in your future engagements, and I've been reading some parts of the Sustainable Recovery Plan, the World Energy Outlook Special Report that you have come up with. I would like to compliment you for your efforts, Laura and your team, and will hope that policymakers in India will work closely with you and see where India can both benefit from it and contribute to your efforts to propagate it to the rest of the world. My best wishes to all the participants and their families and near and dear ones. Please stay safe, please stay healthy, ensure that you are at all times wearing your mask and maintaining physical distance. As we bring our hearts closer together across the world, unfortunately, we will also have to focus on physical distancing, but let's work together in partnership and we shall overcome this COVID pandemic just as we have overcome many crises in the past. God bless all of you. Thank you.
Honorable Minister Goyal, thank you very much for your inspiring keynote, putting sustainability and resilience to the heart of the crisis management and economic recovery efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to switch to our panel discussion. We have a distinguished panel of some of the leading experts and leaders of the energy and environment field in India. Let me briefly introduce the panel members. Mr. Sanjeev Nadan Shahal, the Secretary from the Ministry of Power. Dr. Aruba Ghosh, the Chief Executive Officer of the Council of Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Ram Uperdadash, the Head of the Center for Regional Trade, and Ms. Soma Panderji, the Executive Director of the Confederation of Indian Industries. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Krishnamurti V. Subramanian just outlined in his remarks, India's economic package represents a substantial proportion of GDP and included a host of different spending, reforms, and support to stressed businesses, including those of the energy sector. So I would like you to have a short reflection, 2 minutes, before we dig deeper into the sector-specific aspects of the recovery. Of what measures do you see as the most important in supporting India's rapid and sustainable recovery? Secretary, Mr. Najib Taran Shahai, please, we are looking forward to your comments.
Good afternoon. So specifically, since I will be Parliament's, I will speak about that as part of what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat, which as former speakers have translated it as self-reliant. And we have a package of liquidity of about 90,000 crore. 1 crore is 10 million. To the DISCOMs to pay off the dues to the generating companies, which are central power generating companies, the renewable energy generators, as well as independent power producers. Now, this may seem like a very simple package because the argument that was done is that the DISCOMs were unable to collect the money them during the COVID times, and the generating companies have to pay for fixed costs. Money does not enter the system. Generation and transmission will find it very difficult to generate power or to reach power to the distribution companies. But embedded in this entire liquidity package are reforms. So the liquidity package is split into the first tranche is 45,000 crore, where the DISCOMs have been asked to do some very simple reforms. One is to make enable digital payments from the consumers, so that if there is ever another problem, consumers can pay. They don't need to go to banks or post offices or to collection centers to pay. Those who have access to smartphones, etc., are able to pay their monies. Second is to install smart prepaid meters in all government departments. Now, this again seems as a very easy, simple thing. But of the dues that the distribution companies have, government departments owe over 170,000 crore. So if these departments start prepaying as they do with power and money, we see a major problem that the DISCOMs face will be obviated. Once they have achieved this, the second tranche will be released to them, and the second tranche tightens the screws a little more, wherein they have to agree the trajectory of decline in use the term transmission and distribution losses. We in India always alter things somewhat, and we call it AT&C. It is aggregated technical and commercial losses, because the commercial losses are significant. So they have to be a trajectory to reduce the AT&C loss for a particular period of time, and also bring in certain reform measures, like going before the regulator for revision of the tariff. We hope that with these measures, there would be some semblance of improvement the way state-owned DISCOMs have been performing. Again, not all state-owned DISCOMs perform well. There are many DISCOMs owned by the state which are performing well. But in a large measure, most DISCOMs which are state-owned are subject and buffeted by political economy of the system rather than commercial. They are actually sites of political largesse rather than a commercial model. So with these measures, we hope that the discoms will stay afloat. Now, I'm not getting into the entire stream of reforms that are proposed. The question was specific to the package that has been announced and the comments of Dr. Subramanian. So I'll limit to that, but further details are required. I'm happy to how we are going to look at reforms in the distribution sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And now I would like to invite Dr. Arnab Ghosh to make his initial 2 minutes comments. Dr. Ghosh, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. And first of all, many congratulations to IEA for releasing this report. Particular congratulations to Laura and the team. And thank you also, Dr. Birol, for consulting with organizations across the world as you were looking at the sustainable recovery country by country. So we appreciate your outreach, and we are privileged to be partners with IEA. In addition to what Secretary Sahai has just mentioned, I will just touch upon two other things. I think one of the things that came out, and the Chief Economic Advisor also talked about the humane approach. I think it's important that we recognize how do we support the people at the bottom of the pyramid. The initial package, which had 3 months of LPG cylinders being delivered, at that time when CEW came out with its report called Jobs, Growth and Sustainability, we had recommended that given the lower prices in the global market, it was possible to extend the support for another 3 months, and we are delighted that the government did extend it. The important point here, though, is that we have to think about this as an opportunity to make sure that how do we increase the usability, not just the connections of the clean cooking energy fuels, especially in the poorer households. One more point I just want to make, Laszlo, which is that in the relief packages that the government has announced, there was a substantial component in terms of trying to inject liquidity into the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector. This is something that we believe is the skeleton of the Indian economy. 45% of exports and 40% of informal labor employed nearly 200 million people. Now, this is the sector that also suffers from a lot of energy inefficiency because these small firms do not have the upfront capital to invest in more advanced technology. I think we already now have a base to use the liquidity injection as an opportunity to nudge the micro, small, and medium enterprises towards far more energy efficient systems, which would actually make them far more competitive in the global market. I will save my comments for now on renewables and electric mobility, but I feel these two components on clean cooking energy and on support for micro, small, and medium enterprises could be leveraged for further sustainable reforms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. And may I now invite Mr. Rambuber Dadash from the Center for Regional Trade.
Thank you. Let me first thank the International Energy Agency and NITI Aayog, Honorable Commerce and Industry Minister and Railways Minister, Shri Piyush Goyal ji, CEO NITI Aayog, Shri Amitabh Kant ji, the Chief Economic Advisor, and all the distinguished Dr. Birol and Laura and your whole team. I'm very glad to share some of my thoughts on this very important and topical subject because, as Honorable Minister also mentioned, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to focus on sustainable recovery in the post-COVID era. And you don't get opportunities to inject green economy with green energy always. And therefore, this is a very opportune time. Now, we have had in economics trade theories and growth theories. Now, it is very important to look at the endogenous growth theories as well as the new trade theories from a green perspective. That having said, at the conceptual level, I had some occasion to work on this. But at the operational level, India has a Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which gives labels, star labels from 1 to 5 on appliances like refrigerators and air conditioners. Now, there, taking clue from the behavioral economics, there is something of nudge which is required, because when a consumer goes to a shop floor to buy these items, while it is very important and very much expected that the consumer should be choosing a product with the highest level of energy efficiency, but it doesn't happen always, and its decisions are dependent on brand, pricing, and what the dealer actually propagates to buy a product. Now, while BE has been tremendously successful in terms of reducing electricity consumption as well as reducing the emissions, it's important for us to also alter this labeling requirement as we go towards the recovery, whereby only the most energy efficient products are available for the consumers to choose. So that is one point I wanted to mention. Second is, in terms of, say, if you see the automobile sector, the move towards the electric vehicles, one of the major bottlenecks would be the charging facility. And that is where the international economics actually comes in. So, for instance, sustained availability of lithium and lithium ion and battery manufacturing within the country. We have a plan already, as the CEO Niti Aayog had mentioned. But if we do have charging facilities, which will, by definition, reduce our dependence on fossil fuels in the transport sector on one hand, the charging itself, the power that we derive, right now our energy mix is more towards coal, and there are emission implications there. So at some stage during this recovery, sustainable recovery plan, we will have to look at these options of reducing dependence on fossil fuels in the transport sector on the one hand, and also the charging apparatus that we have, which actually depends on power supply, which is essentially coal-based. And that is where the International Solar Alliance, which Honorable Minister highlighted, assumes great importance. Third point I wanted to mention is that there is a large scope for, within the ambit of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where international collaboration through trade, through foreign direct investment in India, and technology exchange would be warranted. And for this, the trade agreements will have to be redesigned and based on the power of strength and full reciprocity with trade partners, newer trade partners, as the Honorable Minister mentioned. It will be very important to devise a template of trade agreements with different countries where trade in goods, trade in services, foreign direct investment, and the technologies that actually focus on energy efficiency in different sectors of the economy will have to be couched in a manner which is not a regulation per se, which becomes a non-tariff barrier, but a regime which facilitates the international businesses within the broad ambit of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So I limit my points at this stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramudas Radash. And now I would like to invite Ms. Soma Banjarji from the Confederation of Indian Industries.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak on this forum. And I'm glad to be getting a chance to speak from the industry perspective, which is very important as we look at the revival and resilience of the economy. I think it's been said many times by all these speakers, including Minister Goel, as well as Dr. Fatih Birol, how this is going to create a huge opportunity going in the future as every country and economy looks at how do we reposition our economy. I think a very important thing that has come out because of the COVID pandemic is it reinforces the link between health, environment, and economy. And never before has it been reinforced in such a manner where we have to see the question, as was said by many of the panelists, of lives and livelihoods. It's not a question of or. How do we create jobs? How do we create sustainable solutions? how do we also look at the livelihoods and lives of people? Keeping that in mind, I had just 4 or 5 points, which I think is very important as an opening statement. Number one, for India, which has really brought up a huge pipeline of infrastructure projects, as we know, we're looking at huge buildup of infrastructure projects. It's important to look at sustainable infrastructure. So whether we look at roads or whether we look at ports or whether we look at airports, it's very important to look, are we really opting for sustainable infrastructure, something that can be sustained in the long run, which has solutions and use of technology, which is good for the people and for the planet, and that can be taken on a long run basis. The second, which is also important, is how do we use fiscal mechanisms for recovery and resilience? Now, we do have an issue with the fiscal issue today. India's fiscal problem is known, and it is true for most economies. Having been there, we have to look at what are the ways in which we can use the fiscal tools to help in recovery of certain sectors, to see that efficient ways and efficient technologies are taken in. So you could have fiscal measures which will help people switch to better efficient technologies in their operations. The third point, and it's a very important point which was mentioned just before me, is how do we bring about a change in behavior? Now, this is a very important point. The crisis and the pandemic has actually led to a lot of disruption which has helped people look at newer ways of business, look at newer consumer behaviors, look at how newer infrastructure ways can be used. And I think it's time now to really use this newer consumer behavior, but also to look at how do we incentivize and change the consumer behavior to this extent. We've seen how Minister Goel informed about how the power supplies were sustained, how broadband really went into the villages and rural areas. All of that has brought about a change. The very fact that we are having all this on a virtual platform is here to stay. I do not think many of these things are going to go back to where we were. And so that change in consumer behavior really needs to be reinforced and seen that how do we take it forward. The final point I want to make in my opening remarks is how do we bring in regulations that enable technologies? Now, this is a very important thing. Many a times we have seen companies who want to bring in new technologies are kind of stymied because of the regulatory environment. We do not have regulatory environments which encourage companies to innovate or experiment. It means a lot of it needs a lot of risk to be able to do that, but you need a regulatory and ecosystem which is willing to trust and let an entrepreneur and the industry take that risk to innovate and to take risks in newer technologies, which may be in the short term not so good, but in the long term, it may be a great sustainable solution. With those, I think I'll stop here with my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Banjarji. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to our follow-up discussion. I would like to ask Secretary Najib Nandan Shahai for the Minister of Power that the LED program is globally recognized as a great success story, showcasing India's leadership in energy efficiency. So I would like to ask your views to what extent the successful LED program can be used as a template for efficient cooling and air conditioning technologies. Air conditioning has emerged as the biggest, one of the biggest drivers of India's electricity consumption growth. How do you see both efficient air conditioning and other efficient cooling technologies in India's sustainable recovery efforts? Secretary Sai,
Sir, you're on mute.
Sorry, I see a great scope in bringing the same Ujala experiment to air cooling. In Ujala, what we did actually was that one of our parastatals, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, was tasked to bring down the price of LED bulbs. It's 20% of consumption of electricity in India is actually on light. And what they did was to procure in bulk LED bulbs. And at a time when the prices were about 200 rupees, 310 rupees, they were able to bring it down to 70, or even lower if people were ready to take it in weighted monthly installments to the distribution companies. That brought the bulk, the nucleus around which, the market price came down, and the Ujala, we had 6 billion bulbs which have been distributed. So we could do the same for air conditioning. In fact, ESL has given before us the same strategy of price reduction through bulk procurement, targeting domestic and institutional consumers. Its deployment, again, in offices, government offices to lead the way. Engagement of discoms so that people can buy it and pay for the electricity bills on an easy weighted monthly installments, on-bill financing models, etc. And ESL has launched the program in 2019. It's still in its infancy, called the Super Efficient AC Program, and it has put about 50,000 air conditioners, which are, I don't know the technical term, but it's written with ISEER value of 5.4, which is about 25% more energy efficient than 3-star air conditioners, which are its peers. And 5,000 such ACs have been deployed, 20,000 are in the pipeline. So we are very clear that we will push this program forward so that air space cooling, which is taking going to take a lot of energy, becomes far more efficient via the ESL and through the same successful template that we have. Thank
you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Now I would move to Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh, before the pandemic, the growth of solar in India has consistently exceeded expectations, and India has really emerged as one of the bright lights of solar energy. I think it's fair to say that there is a risk that the epidemic might derail some of this prospect. So what do you think, what measures the Indian government should implement, and what are these measures that can maintain the solar momentum in India?
Thank you, Laszlo. Again, the first thing we have to recognize is actually the solar story in some ways has been a relatively brighter spot even during the crisis. Even as thermal power production has significantly gone down, solar production generation has actually gone up. Even before the pandemic hit, there were already innovations happening, which now need to continue to happen on new bidding models. So there is now hybrid solar wind storage bids that are happening, which have already revealed very low prices for non-peak hours, just 2.88 rupees. There's new bids going on around the clock energy, which with projecting for very high capacity utilization factors for the solar and wind projects. There are also very clearly new bidding models around manufacturing linked tenders, which would give a boost to the domestic manufacturing. In addition to these bidding models, one of the other things that has to happen, of course, is the legacy problems of the power sector as well. And Secretary Sahai has already referenced several of the moves that were made during the pandemic in terms of the 90,000 crore and now counting towards the discoms. Now, here's the thing. Once we make the discoms more financially healthy, it actually improves the prospects for the investments in renewables as well. Our calculations at CEW suggest that up to 25,000 crore worth of coal could be avoided if we shifted to more efficient thermal power plants. So this is not even talking about moving from coal to solar. But if we shifted to more efficient thermal power plants, we actually reduce the procurement costs for the distribution companies, which then is one more sustainable way of improving their balance sheets which then makes it more viable for the credibility of the contracts that are being signed on the renewable energy side. The third thing that has to be done, and again, we've at our CEW Center for Energy Finance has come out with a suggestion that over the course of the next 5 years, not just this year, and this is why your report is also very important, because you take that 3-year, 4-year cycle. Over the course of the next 5 years, spending about 4,500 crore, so less than $1 billion, spread over 5 years, as a credit enhancement subsidy could crowd in additional bond investment in the renewable energy sector of up to $10 billion. So there's a massive leverage opportunity here in terms of bringing in the institutional capital that is needed. The last thing I would say is linked to the mobility transition as well. As the Honorable Minister was also saying, by 2030, if we can get to even 30% of the vehicles being sold being electric, then our estimation is that India could be saving about $6 billion in that year alone in terms of oil imports. But the integration of the electric mobility infrastructure within a broader electricity system would be crucial, which is where distributed energy becomes extremely important. Distributed production, distributed consumption, and distributed storage. This also, going back to Laura's earlier comments, has a great impact in terms of jobs. Our current renewable energy targets is likely to create a workforce of 330,000 people. With what the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned last year of scaling that up to 450,000 megawatts of renewables by 2030, we could be looking at another more than 500,000 workers in the renewable sector. However, distributed energy creates 7 times more jobs per unit than utility scale solar, which creates more jobs than thermal power. So every 4 gigawatts of rooftop solar creates 50,000 jobs. 20 gigawatts of mini grids creates several more jobs, on more than 100,000 jobs in that sector. Then there is the space around sustainable solar-based irrigation, which again has an impact on the agricultural side, but also on the job creation side. So when we break up the investment story in these respective parts, we see one, save discoms their procurement costs by shifting towards efficient thermal power, sign more credible contracts with these innovative bidding models that are going on for utility scale solar, then focus on the electricity mobility transition, and also bring in the innovative financing in terms of credit enhancement that can bring in the institutional capital needed for our massive scale up out to 2030.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. I would now move to Dr. Rabubada Dash. Dr. Dash, in the recent years, India emerged also as a manufacturing powerhouse, both for appliances and also for vehicles, which we highlighted in our Sustainable Recovery Report as a great opportunity. So how do you think a stimulus could help these industries moving towards a more sustainable product structure and also improve their competitiveness in international markets at the same time?
Thank you. It's a very good question. And I would like to divide it into 2 parts. One is that the international competitiveness of production of appliances and sectors like automobile, as you mentioned, we have been increasing our production capability over the years due to government's conscious efforts. But at the same time, the price and the quality both will have to be addressed in terms of improving India's global competitiveness in these sectors. Now, many a times it is considered that when you enhance standards, you incur costs. So the producers are, confronted with an inertia in terms of improving standards. And here, if we refer to green standards and efficiency, environment-friendly technologies adoption, you would feel that the producers do look at it as a cost. But we have been arguing that while this may begin as a cost, but if this standard is applied and utilized in the production process, the technical premium that this additional expenditure in terms of shifting the production technique to more energy efficient, environment friendly technologies would result in, over a period of time in a dynamic setting, in a technical premium. And that technical premium then translates into a brand premium. And therefore, I have always argued that a standards ecosystem, which is required for the increasing the green content of production processes within the broad ambit of Atmanirbhar Bharat, would ultimately result in uh, quality competitiveness, which will result in price competitiveness in the sense that the products would be acceptable both domestically and in the global markets much more because they are inherently energy efficient and environment friendly. And therefore, one of the areas of focus to increase global competitiveness of India would be in terms of the standards. Second is, as the Honorable Minister mentioned, that we need to collaborate with trusted economic partners. India, as he also highlighted, has entered into an arrangement with Japan and Australia for a resilient supply chain initiative. There, again, the work of Niti Aayog and IEA becomes very relevant if we can, enjoin the concepts of sustainable recovery with resilient supply chains. Similarly, we would be looking at, technological and FDI collaboration with countries like UK with Brexit and West Europe and North America, Canada, and US to engage with India so that our domestic ecosystem on these fronts actually becomes such that we are competitive not only within the country but also globally with the quality which is safe for human consumption as well as good for the environment and contributes to energy efficiency at the same time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raj. Now I would move to Ms. Banerjee. Ms. Banerjee, we estimated that overall globally, around 2/3 of the investment for the sustainable recovery could come from the private sector if governments put in place the proper investment frameworks and policy measures. So how do you see this unfolding in the Indian economy? What role the private sector would play in the sustainable recovery, and what mechanism and what institutions the government could put in place to effectively mobilize the private sector for sustainable recovery efforts?
And I'm thankful to you for putting that question to me. The first thing I'd like to say, which is really no rocket science, is we need a very consistent policy environment. In sectors like electricity particularly, India, as we know, is a federal country where electricity rests as a concurrent subject, where the state government and the central government have equal rights over how the sector is ruled and governed. That has often brought about a lot of inconsistency in the way we have gone ahead as far as policies are concerned. And it is actually not the policy creation, but the policy implementation that really creates the ecosystem, how investments or sustainable investments or the private sector really puts its money where the mouth is when it comes to the energy sector. So I think the first thing I would like to emphasize is policy consistency, which should be across the country, which is idealistically, and I think more easily said than done, because despite the best of intentions by both the center and the state, we do find a lot of mismatch at times on the ground level, which kind of takes us back to where we started from, when it comes to the electricity sector. The second thing which is very important is also, like I said before, ability to actually address the risk appetite of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs. You in a time like today, we're looking at newer technologies. We're looking at innovative solutions, not just in technology, but also, like my friend Dr. Ghosh said, in financing. You really need those kind of special incentives, special moves to be taken by entrepreneurs who need to show their risk appetite in doing so. But for doing that, need the support of the policymakers to reward you for really taking those risks, because it's not the best times otherwise. But this is also the time when a person can really do that kind of experimenting when it comes to any of the innovative solutions, whether for technologies or whether for financing or whether for even collaboration. For, and how does an entrepreneur really play the role of an entrepreneur in doing so? The third thing, which is very important, and I'd like to just mention that we are at that point in our economy, in fact, the world over, where demand has got very badly disrupted. As we know, the COVID pandemic, even before the pandemic came into India, India's economy was at a slower burner than before. We were seeing a slowdown in our economy. And the COVID pandemic has only escalated and highlighted the huge demand destruction that has taken place. Private investments, private investments is demand. So it's important to see what do we do to really encourage demand creation, and demand creation which is not only sustainable but the right kind of demand. And here I think there is a very important role to be played by the government and the private sector. I'm not really divorcing the private sector out of this. We have a role as much as the government in seeing that bulk demand for the right kind of energy really picks up. And when I speak of this, I mean about the demand that can be created by the commercial and industrial consumers for renewable energy. We really need the big bulk consumers to come on board. You heard Minister Goel speaking about how the railways are moving with such huge, ambitious targets. And that is the kind of thing which we need to see from our bulk consumers, of how they really move towards renewable energy and create the kind of demand we need, so that there is a market that is created. And finally, the last point, Secretary Sahai spoke about some of the very important measures being taken for restoring and to really modernize our electricity sector. But one very important thing which the sector recommendations are saying, and it's part of our Electricity Act amendment, is allowing the market to develop. Now, that's a very, very important thing for investments to really kick in. They're seeing, or they're having provisions by which open access becomes a reality, so that a buyer and a seller gets the choice of buying or selling the electricity to the right consumer, who's a more sustainable consumer. So open access becoming a reality, a market or a spot market for renewable energy, which we have not seen till now. How do we to really put mechanism in the country? I think market conditions, risk appetite, support system, and consistency. These are four things which I would like to highlight, which is needed today to get the private sector into the game. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my gratitude for the distinguished panelists for their very, very illuminating insights. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Nicole Thomas, who is coordinating the IEA India work program for a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laszlo. I'm very honoured to offer the vote of thanks today to all of our distinguished participants on behalf of the IEA and of NITI Aayog. So we were very fortunate to have the participation of the Honourable Minister of Railways and Minister of Commerce and Industry, Shri Piyush Goyal, to provide our keynote speech, and I think give a real sense of optimism for the sustainable recovery in India. I'd also like to thank Sri Amitabh Kant, CEO of NITI Aayog, Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the IEA, Dr. Krishnamurthy V. Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor, and Laura Kodsi, IEA Chief Energy Modeler, for their informative and really well-considered special addresses to the group. And I'd like to add to Laszlo's thanks to the perspectives of our excellent panel participants, Secretary of Power, Sri Sanjeev Nandan Sahai, CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, Head of the Centre for Regional Trade, Dr. Ramapendra Das, and CEI Executive Director Soma Banerjee. And last but not least, also thank our Chief Economist at the IEA, Dr. Laszlo Varro, for his moderation of the session. I thought it was really useful to explore some of the sectoral aspects of a sustainable recovery and the potential implications for supporting jobs and supporting the Indian economy. There's very clearly a lot of challenges ahead, but I think we can see from the panel discussion that there's no shortage of ideas and of champions to take this change forward. Finally, I'd like to just say a quick thank you to all of our guests who've joined us on the webinar, both through WebEx and on the live stream. I hope the discussion has been really useful. The IEA has been very pleased to be able to launch our special report on the sustainable recovery in India, given the undeniable influence of India on the global energy sector. We remain ready to help and support India and other nations in moving towards a sustainable